Modernism is a movement that started off after the Victorian era and came into rising after World War I for the sake of cost-efficient buildings because of reconstruction of war. The main characteristics of the modern architecture is that form follows function, and materials stay true to its nature. What that means is that a building will be designed around the functionality and circulation, and the materials used will not be covered by a secondary substance, keeping the building true to its nature. Many architects and architectural theorists have different opinions or views on modern architecture. In the essay Ornament and Crime, Adolf Loos mentions that modern architecture came into pop through its simplicity and design, and the building's ability to stay true to it. He also talked about architecture using too much ornamentation, which he thought skewed the beauty of the building. Loos did not approve of over-the-top ornamentation in architecture. However, he did not disapprove of it entirely. Adolf Loos believed that as long as ornamentation was used for appropriate reasons that added significance to the building, it was not completely wrong. Corbusier was part of the starting movement of modern architecture and says that a building is a living machine, implying how buildings are made for its functionality, and the best design is clarity in form. He believes in simplicity in design and that architecture should be standardized. But Denise Brown would criticize that belief because standardizing architecture and having simple designs would be killing creativity. She believed that a building should not be made for just aesthetics, but aesthetics can be built around the functionality of the building, balancing between excessive design and simplicity. Denise Brown's idea complements Adolf Loos' idea of using ornamentation on a building appropriately. Regardless of what either believed about modern architecture, modernism still ended. Colin Rowe's explanation from his essay, Collage City, explains why modern architecture died. Rowe says that the design of modern architecture was too simple and ended up dying because it was underappreciated by people who couldn't understand that the functionality of the buildings was a greater importance than the building's simple exterior design. After the modernistic era, postmodernism arose due to society's thirst for beauty in architecture. Postmodernism was more aesthetically oriented rather than practically, which is why it became so popular. Postmodernism broke away from the rigid structures like horizontal and vertical lines from modernism, but also shared the same characteristics of integrating light into design, using more whimsical and organic shapes and design for aesthetic purposes. Postmodernist architecture originally came into being in the 1950s, but did not become popular until 20 years later. It wasn't until postmodernism was introduced that people started criticizing modernism for not being pop architecture. Pop architecture is the popular demand of society. Since society was changing, its preferences and needs became tired of the old, boring, modernistic buildings. People were no longer interested in conserving resources and having functionality in the building. People wanted to see aesthetically pleasing architecture. Since modernism couldn't keep up with society changes and social culture, it became outdated. The failure of modernism is strongly expressed in Charles Jenks' essay, The Language of Postmodernism. Jenks talks about the Pruitt Ego, an urban housing project located in St. Louis, Missouri, whose sole purpose was to provide functionality. According to the author, modernism died the moment Pruitt Ego was torn down on July 15, 1972. Pruitt Ego was given high expectations but failed tremendously when people used it for graffiti and vandalism. Eventually, maintenance for the buildings became unaffordable, so it was decided that it should be torn down. Jenks believed that the remains should be preserved so future architects could know what not to do. If there's any criticism to be made about postmodernism, it would be due to the fact that postmodern architecture focuses too much on design and not enough on functionality and budget. Specifically, Adolf Loos would criticize postmodern architecture for skewing the interior, design, and circulation, while Denise Brown would criticize for wasting the budget for just aesthetics, rather than adding aesthetics on top of the pre-designed building. And finally, Colin Rowe would disagree because it would not fit into his ideal collage city. Colin Rowe's collage city is an idea that a city is made up of different attributing buildings that come together to form a uniform entity. Colin Rowe would then dislike postmodern architecture because it typically differentiates itself from its surroundings, breaking that uniform body. If by any chance there was an area of the world that was just made up of postmodern architecture, Rowe would not criticize the project because it creates a homogeneous entity. Through the two viewpoints of modern architecture and postmodern architecture, modern architecture is a better design style through its multiple purposes like cost efficiency, functionality, and clearness in design, but lacks in aesthetics and thoughtfulness. Although modern architecture is better, it should have some principles of postmodern architecture, making it more aesthetically pleasing. In spite of the fact that it hasn't been mentioned by the many authors that we cited previously, modernism can be perceived as a form of dumb practice, while postmodernism can be perceived as dumb theory. A crossbreed between both modern and postmodern architecture, focusing more on modernism, is the ideal design. This can be constructed by following Denise Brown's idea of balancing in design and Adolf Lowe's idea of ornamentation at appropriate times.